Welcome to Bankole's Nation. I'm your host, Bankole Thompson, and thank you so much for joining us. Coming up, we're talking with State Senator Stephanie Chang from Lansing, of course, Detroit State Senator Stephanie Chang, about the recent budget that the Michigan legislature passed, which Governor Gretchen Whitmer signed into law. What's in the bipartisan spending plan? Coming up right after this break, State Senator Stephanie Chang speaks to us. Bring in State Senator Stephanie Chang from Detroit. Michigan recently passed its bipartisan budget in Lansing. Of course, there was a scuffle, perhaps a political skirmish between Republicans and Democrats, of course, including Governor Gretchen Whitmer. One of the holdouts was State Senator Stephanie Chang. And now that the governor has signed the budget, as State Senator, thank you so much for being here.
Oh, yeah. Happy to be here. Thanks for talking about this important issue.
Yeah, and I want to go through it as well because I think this is important. We're watching. There's a federal shutdown, right, of the
Yep.
government in Washington, but thankfully there's no shutdown in Lansing. Let's unravel the budget because I know you were a holdout in terms of back and forth meetings with the governor's office, and of course Republicans in terms of them also playing out. What are some of the things that in the budget that you are happy about, and what are some of the issues that perhaps are still outstanding?
For sure. Yeah. And just to be totally clear,
Right.
I was a holdout, I think is an accurate term, on specifically House Bill 4951, which was the bill creating the flow of marijuana, a new marijuana wholesale tax towards roads. But I was a yes on everything else. So,
Okay.
and
But
ultimately did,
you were
I did.
opposed to a marijuana tax?
I did ultimately support the whole package,
Okay.
although I still have very much, some reservations about that one particular bill. But I think on the whole, I'm very pleased with the way that things turned out. As you noted, there is no government shutdown in Michigan. I'm glad that we are much more functional than Washington, D.C. This is the first budget that we've passed in a divided legislature in a
Hmm.
really long time.
Hmm.
And we're in a really polarized uh, environment.
Right.
So the fact that we were able to preserve a number of the things that the House Republicans wanted to cut, we were able to block a lot of anti-DEI, anti-immigrant, anti-LGBT language. The fact that we were able to actually increase per pupil funding, preserve universal school meals, we protected Medicaid instead of blowing $1 billion hole in the budget, which is what, the Trump budget bill would have done. We invested in public safety, water affordability, and the list goes on. There's a lot of great things in there for Michigan families, for workers, of course, the road seal, and a lot coming back to Detroit as well. So we're still, it's there's a
Hmm.
lot in there. And so I think we're going to continue to find, some of the impacts that we'll see in the coming years.
And much of this, as you talk about the DEI, water affordability, Medicaid, much of this owes itself to the fact that Democrats do control the Senate in Lansing, right? You have majority Senate,
Yes. Yes,
and
absolutely.
and
So we
that's
have Democratic
that's the
Senate.
political leverage that you have.
Yes, and I have to give a lot of credit to Chairwoman Sarah Anthony and our Senate Majority Leader Winnie Brinks for really holding strong on a lot of things that are really key Democratic values that we were not going to give up. And if you look at the Senate passed budget that we passed in May versus the
Hmm.
Republican House budget that they passed in August, there were so many giant differences. And the fact that we were able to come up with a compromise that really preserves a lot of our good work that we've been doing over the past couple of years with the trifecta is honestly pretty amazing. It's not perfect by any means,
Hmm.
but certainly a lot of good things in there.
Well, let's talk about the water affordability plan because I think that cuts to the poverty question in places like Detroit, Benton Harbor, Flint, and of course, every poverty center in rural Michigan as well. Let's talk about that affordability plan and the funding for that. How important is that?
So important. What we know is that from the data that we have analyzed is that over 317,000 Michigan households really struggle to pay their water bills. That's a lot of households.
Yeah,
And
that's a
so
lot of families.
it's so many families, and you mentioned some of our urban core areas, but also definitely those rural areas as well.
Right.
But no, honestly, even in some suburban towns where you wouldn't expect people to maybe be struggling, it is literally everywhere. And with water bills becoming more and more expensive, we want to make sure that programs like the RAP program in our area or the Lifeline program in Detroit,
Hmm.
that we are able to keep those going, and also in addition to the $5 million that we secured in this budget, we've been working really hard on our bipartisan legislation to create a sustainable program over time to ensure that every single person in Michigan gets a water bill that they can afford.
Yeah, yeah. Now, what about the funding for schools? Because that's also been a big issue here. And what's in that?
Yeah. Well, the school budget, I am really amazed, honestly, at a lot of the things that Senator Darren Camilleri, who's the lead on this budget, he did an incredible job. The Universal School Meals Program was a
Hmm.
huge victory when we had a Democratic trifecta, and we were really worried because the Republicans in the House, in their proposal would have gotten rid of that. But we were actually able to preserve that funding. And last year alone in Michigan, 800,000 students ate those meals. And so the reason why this is important is, in the past, yes, if you were low income, you could qualify for free or reduced lunch. But what we know is that there's so much stigma around free and reduced lunch that not everyone's actually eating that free or reduced lunch. So by making
Right.
it universal, everyone is getting fed. There, you don't know who can afford it or who can't. Just everyone's getting that meal if they want to. And honestly, with so many working parents across our state, it is just a huge burden lifted for a lot of us, right? To be able to just know that we can get our kids to school, they will have the food that they need to get
Right.
through the day.
But even if we have to deconstruct that the meal itself for schools, and I know I've seen some action out of Benton Harbor. Eleanor Gavin, who's a member of the Benton Harbor Area School Board, has been pushing to ensure that there was still funding support for a district like Benton Harbor. But even if we have to deconstruct in terms of who benefits from these school meals, it's not only urban centers. I mean, there's poverty in in rural Michigan, and so there are kids in rural Michigan who actually do also benefit from this meal in schools.
Absolutely.
So the stigma that this is just an urban center crisis or for poverty, black poverty-stricken school district, it is false. I mean, rural Michigan, where there is also concentrated poverty, does benefit from school meals.
Absolutely. And then on top of the preservation of universal school meals, we also increased funding for at-risk school districts,
Hmm.
which is, again, we're talking about the same thing between urban
Right.
and rural districts. So that's going to be huge, and also increased funding for English language learners. It is a miracle that somehow both of those categories were able to actually get an increase. So a lot of good work that went in there. I mean, one of the things that I have found is a lot of times the school budget ends up being the most bipartisan budget, even under Republican legislatures, because I think everyone cares about kids, everyone cares
Right.
about schools, but of course, there's different values. Sometimes when you talk about charter schools or you're talking about certain
Public
other
schools.
things,
Right.
but um, I think we found some really great compromises and we're able to preserve and actually increase a lot of the things that help everyone. So really excited about that.
You mentioned DEI initially, and I want to really go into a big, actually about that to elaborate more because I've seen across the nation, we've seen some state legislatures that have been reining in DEI and, of course, taking their cue from the national front, the federal government here. What is different about the Michigan legislature here? Because you mentioned that, there's the preservation of DEI as well in this bipartisan budget that passed. Can you elaborate?
Yeah, well, I think that having a Democratic governor and Democratic Senate was hugely helpful in this effort because
Hmm.
our leaders helped really strong on this. We were able to make sure that the anti-trans kids language that was proposed was taken out. The anti-immigrant language, for the most part, was taken out. And so, I think that that is a huge win because, and then, think about also the fact that the House Republicans had proposed severe cuts to the Michigan Department of Civil Rights, which is the agency that's responsible for
Right. Yep.
investigating discrimination.
Right.
I mean, that is not an agency that should be cut. And if anything, they probably need more money.
So the
So
funding for the Michigan Civil Rights Commission has been preserved.
it's been preserved. I mean, one of the things that I have to be totally clear about, though, is that
Hmm.
unfortunately, there are some sort of like staff capacity cuts that happened in pretty much every single department, but
Okay.
the cuts that were made are, I think, not going to really impact the services that are provided. And that's from the conversations that we've had with various departments. These are the things that people need, we will still get from those departments, including the Department of Civil Rights.
So I asked the DEI question because in other states where you have, you know, I think majority Republican House and the Senate, here there's been conditions placed on public universities like Michigan State University of Michigan, Wayne State University, and other, Eastern Michigan University, that in order to get funding from the state, you have to, abolish your entire DEI institutions, departments in those universities. Uh, in this case here in Michigan, that is not the case with this budget, correct?
That is not the case. At least that is my understanding. That is not the case. And, I think that there has been, unfortunately, across our country, a huge, unnecessary and unprecedented attack on higher education. And I am a firm believer that we need to protect our institutions of higher education because they're generating the leaders and the innovators and the people that we need to keep our state and economy going. So, and DEI is diversity, equity, and inclusion is a huge important part of a college education. I will note that actually earlier this year, the Senate passed my resolution actually affirming our commitment to diversity, equity, and inclusion. We partnered with a group that Stacey Abrams founded, American Pride Rises, to work on that resolution. And so our body of
Mhm.
this legislature has actually now officially said that, yes, we are recommitted to this concept because we recognize how important it is really to the American dream overall.
Yeah, yeah. Let's talk about the road funding. I find it quite an irony here that this was the perhaps the overarching or the heralding mantra upon which Governor Gretchen Whitmer ran for office on, fixing dam roads and so forth. In fact, she talked about it almost every juncture on the campaign trail. And road funding finally coming towards the end of the 8-year term of the Whitmer administration. Quite an irony for you.
Yeah, I think that 2025 is just a different year than 2018,
How
right?
so?
In 2018, we hadn't been through a pandemic. We
Okay.
hadn't seen the elections of 2020 and 2024. In, we were not in this time where we're concerned about cuts to Medicaid and SNAP benefits and will our hospitals survive and what's going on with our schools. And so 2025, I think that one of the things that I think is really, really clear is that so for us as Senate Democrats, right, like we have served in the majority now for almost 3 years. Two of those were in a trifecta. We were prioritizing a lot of things to put people first. And while many of us, of course, absolutely want to make sure that we have a long-term sustainable road funding solution, which we now do have because we passed it last week. We also were really concerned with the proposals that had been out there, right, about funding roads off of cuts. And so what we saw is, House Republicans trying to create road funding solution based off of major cuts to every single department,
Right.
getting rid of school meals, getting rid of all these things. So the governor, has been steadfast in making this her priority.
Hmm.
I think that there are a number of Democrats who obviously are passionate about infrastructure issues, but we also have had to balance that with the fact that we need to preserve food, healthcare,
Right.
basic human needs. And so I'm glad that in this budget we were able to do a little bit of something for everyone.
Right. Well, let me talk about let's talk about the Medicaid, and I want to also talk about the trifecta control of the House, Senate, and the governor's office you've been referring to in this interview. But let's deal with the Medicaid issue though here for people who are listening, and of course, families who are severely economically disadvantaged, who depend on the state, and those who whose lifeline basically is expecting that kind of a monthly, if you will, whether it's a food stamp or some sort of an assistance from the state, if you will. Where are they in this budget?
Yes. So this is about to get a little wonky, so apologies in advance.
Okay.
There is a thing called the Insurance Provider Assessment, the acronym for that IPA. And so the IPA basically generates revenue by assessing insurers. But under the Trump, one big beautiful or one big betrayal bill, whatever you want to call it, they
Mhm.
made changes to how states can assess providers to draw down Medicaid dollars. And so the way that we preserved Medicaid in this budget and avoided I think $1.1 billion hole is that we preserved dedicated Medicaid match revenue in the case that CMS might not provide an extension to the phase out of these provider fees. And so this allows DHHS also to be able to continue to set an assessment for providers that would generate revenue for those match tail dollars. So basically, we're keeping Medicaid fully funded in Michigan by
Okay.
making adjustments to this IPA, which is the Insurance Provider Assessment. So that I know those the like for I'm not a healthcare expert, so when I
Right,
first
right,
had
right,
this
right.
explained to me, I'm like, what is this? But this is something that there were major changes in the Trump, HR1 at the
Mhm.
federal level, and so we were able to stave off the horrible, terrible impact that that would have had for Medicaid
Mhm.
recipients and our budget by changing and preserving that kind of assessment on insurers.
So I asked the question because in the past, Republicans have sought to rewrite the rules, if you will, in terms of who gets support, states assistance, welfare support from the state, and the work hours and so forth. So perhaps my question is more pointed towards that.
Sure.
For families who are looking now to say, okay, am I going to continue to have assistance from the state of Michigan? Is it an issue where I'm going to be subjected to an unbelievable amount of work hours and so forth to be able to get assistance from the state?
Yeah, so thank you for asking that. Unfortunately, what is still the case is
Hmm.
unless, at the federal level, Democrats take back control of the House next year, those changes that were made to the Medicaid, so basically instilling the Medicaid work requirements, which
Hmm.
will, I believe, start in a couple of years, that
Right.
is still the law. So
Okay.
what we can't change that at the state level. But I'm hopeful that Democrats can flip that house and be able to, undo some of those really harmful provisions before they take effect. That is really kind of the only way that that can happen.
So
But
for people who are listening to you speak, Senator Chang, is the question becomes, what is the reprieve?
yeah,
What is the reprieve or what is the relief right now for struggling Michigan
yep,
families, for struggling Detroit families in this
for
budget?
sure. So just going back to Medicaid real quick, just to make sure it's really clear.
Right.
What we have done is help protect Medicaid for 1 year. We will
Okay.
likely have to have this fight again. And of course, the provisions at the federal level are still there. So I just want to be totally clear so that people don't think we've completely undone the changes at the federal level. We
Right.
can't, but what we can do is preserve for 1 year with the funding that we've done. So I want to highlight, and thanks for the question, some things that are really big wins for the city of Detroit. So I've been a big champion of the right to counsel and evictions,
Right.
but that has been underfunded really since it began. A couple years ago, I secured $2.5 million. This year, Senator Kavanaugh secured $1.5 million for the right to counsel program. This is super important because it helps keep people in their homes, which is so critical
Yeah.
in many
With the
ways.
eviction pandemic in Detroit.
It's huge,
Right.
huge, huge, huge. A couple other things. I'm a big fan of the Gleaners Community Food Bank, and they have a new uh, place called Fresh by Gleaners, and it's actually on the 8 Mile border. So it serves both Warren and Detroit residents in my district and beyond. And so we were able to secure $500,000 for them. And we know that food insecurity
Mm-hmm.
is rising.
Right.
And so this is going to be huge to be able to provide food in that area. And then there was a number of other things. So I secured $500,000 from Genesis Hope, which is an East Side neighborhood
Mm-hmm.
organization for their senior wellness community center. $500,000 for Empowerment Plan, which is the organization that works with homeless individuals to make the sleeping bag coats for other homeless individuals, and they do workforce development. Um, Focus Hope, I believe Representative Scott actually is the one who secured $1 million for Focus Hope to be able to keep their efforts going.
Mm-hmm.
The Samaritan Center on the east side of Detroit, $500,000 there. There's a lot more, but those
Okay.
are a few of the things. I think that, and then of course, the city of Detroit as a whole, really doing as much as we can to protect revenue sharing, which is
Okay.
the formula that is used to give the cities money through the state. And then the CVI dollars. Of course, the money that was secured is statewide. So I didn't actually mention this yet, but for community violence intervention, there's a total of over $15 million statewide. And I would imagine
Which is
that
the
a large chunk of
CVI.
that will,
Okay.
yeah, a
Okay.
large chunk of that will come to Detroit. And having heard from so many of the groups in Detroit that are doing incredible work to literally interrupt violence and also prevent gun violence, I'm really hopeful that that money will continue to make an impact.
Okay. Well, I'm glad to hear that there's $1 million coming for Focus Hope. I wrote a column in my Detroit News column about that. Focus Hope having, coming out, came out of the ashes of the 1967 race rebellion
Absolutely.
and the work that my late friend Eleanor Josides and of course the late Father Cunningham established such a legacy institution that is still relevant in the lives of many disenfranchised families in Detroit. So you kept talking about the trifecta here. I wanna just flash back to the trifecta. If 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 you could foresee the future, um, this era of Trumpism that we find ourselves in, are there missed opportunities here with the trifecta? When you had control of the governor's office, the Senate, and the House, with Speaker Joe Tate, and I know some questions you can't answer because you are not the Speaker, but of course I read, and I've been, I'll say it for the record, I've been very critical of Joe Tate as Speaker of the House. My opinion, I felt he didn't do as much as he could have done, being the most powerful individual with the gavel here in the state. And the fact that towards the end of his term, there were some bills that were never pushed to the governor's office. But as a member of the Democratic legislature or as a member of the Democratic Club, I put the question to you. If you could foresee the future that we were going to we were going to enter into a second Trump era, and with all the Democrats are faced with today, are there remarkable missed opportunities with the Democratic trifecta in Lansing when you had control over the governor's office, the House, and the Senate? What could you have done differently?
Yeah. Well, this is a really important question, and I'm glad you're asking. And I think you are probably aware that I am on the sort of like more progressive social justice end of the
Right,
Michigan Democratic legislature.
right.
And so my answer is definitely yes. There are some things that I wish we could have done. And I think that maybe if we had, I mean, one of the things that I think that unfortunately we need to grapple with as a party.
Hmm.
Um, is that I think sometimes we when we have a majority, when we have control, we are sometimes very worried. We act too cautiously, and instead of taking on the biggest, boldest changes that people want, that people deserve, that people are
Hmm.
talking about. And so, I'll share a couple of examples, but I
Sure.
definitely think that there are things that maybe we should have prioritized even earlier on in the term. you may know that I've been working on police accountability issues for such a long time.
Mhm.
That is something that is just like a clear example of something that needs to get done to address many of the instances of police brutality that we've seen in our time, that we have failed as a state to get any meaningful legislation to the governor's desk, and that is a shame. Water affordability is something that I've been working on for 10 years. And especially during this time when everyone has been talking about we need to make things more affordable for Michiganders. Well, that was something really clear that we could have done.
Mhm.
And then, I think one of the things I look around now and I see all of these people who are seeing what's going on with deportations and detentions. And I think now people are realizing that yes, we need to recommit to protecting immigrant communities. Well, we should have had that enthusiasm over the past 2 years to pass meaningful legislation to protect immigrant communities. So I don't think that any one person is to blame. I
Right.
think overall we just need to do a better job of being a little bit less afraid to tackle hard issues because people didn't send us to Lansing to do small things. They
Right.
sent us to Lansing to tackle some of the biggest, hardest problems. And so we've got to get creative. We've got to think through and take sometimes hard votes on
Mhm.
issues that really matter most, and think and really take every issue, think about every issue in terms of how is this going to benefit Michiganders.
Right.
Um, so there's a lot more to say, but
Right. No,
those are
no,
some thoughts.
and I wanted to definitely get your take and your opinion on that. But of course, I live in a very pragmatic world, so I do recognize that all is not lost. And with with the control of the Democratic Senate, all of you were able to get some of these things, into the budget, saving, helping focus up and other essential services that are important to cities like Detroit, Benton Harbor, and, concentrated poverty in rural Michigan as well. But let's talk about 2026 here. There's a governor's race coming, and we'll have enough time to talk about the candidates who are running and so forth. But just I want to get your take in terms of how much of this bipartisan, quote unquote, bipartisan spending plan that the governor signed, how much of that informs your thinking going into 2026, and how significant is the 2026 governor's race?
Yeah, no, that's a great question. And I think, not only the governor's race, right? We've got the governor's race and we've got the entire state house and the state
Right.
senate up as well.
Hmm.
And every single one of those elections is going to be really important. And I think this question is definitely tied to the last question that you asked, right? In terms of who we elect and are they going to be able to take on some of the biggest challenges and some of the more controversial things that people have been waiting for years.
Hmm.
And so I hope that voters will keep that in mind. It's hard to predict exactly how someone will be when they govern, but for many of the candidates who are running for governor, well, we have seen how they have governed, and so I am not endorsing in the Democratic primary, but I'm going to be fully behind whoever the Democratic nominee
Hmm.
is.
Well, why
And
why have you decided not to endorse in the Democratic primary?
I'm sorry, what was that?
I say, why aren't you endorsing in the primary?
Well, I think that I have good relationships with all three of the candidates
Okay.
who are running, and there are really great things about all of them. And in particular, the lieutenant governor and I have known each other for a long time. We both, we're three of two of the candidates are Detroiters. I'm also a Detroiter. Secretary Benson has done a phenomenal job with the Secretary of State's office, and was a huge partner in the Michigan Voting Rights Act, which is another thing that unfortunately didn't get done during the lame duck last year. But there's been a number of things that I've worked on with, Secretary Benson and Lieutenant Governor Gilchrist in particular over the past many years, and I consider them both good friends. So, but I'm definitely eager to support, the winner of that primary and work as hard as I can to get them elected.
Yeah, but do realize that the Republicans are on the other side as well, and that President Trump is going to be all over the governor's race because it'll be important for him if he can turn Michigan red and have a Trump-like governor here in the state. In the wings of that, of course, is also Mayor Mike Duggan, who is waiting an independent run for governor. There is no guarantee whether he can make it or not. Some observers have, pointedly said he's going to be a spoiler that Mayor Mike Duggan his run for governor could enable a Republican governor here. Your take on that? The reality that it's not, I think it'd be foolish for any of us to think that the possibility of a Republican governor is far fetched. Not that we're predicting it, but the political climate, right? That the reality of a Republican governor is not far fetched, and the reality of a Democratic governor is not far fetched either. So this is up for grabs. And the Mayor Mike Duggan factor as an independent running for governor.
Yeah, I mean, Mayor Duggan has proven himself as a leader. I've had some public agreements with him and some public disagreements on things. I also think that, he's been very
Right.
effective.
Right.
But I have no predictions about how that will all play out. I know
Mm.
that everyone is campaigning really hard. I think one of the things, though, that I think is really important is that because we're seeing every single day the chaos and dysfunction of a Trump presidency, and we're seeing more and more people rise up and become active and write postcards and go to marches and rallies and then raise money and find different ways to plug into all of the activism that's happening right now. What I hope is that that will continue all the way up until next November and beyond. And I think that it's really important that every Democrat who is running for office is really clear about what it is that we stand for, in addition to pointing out all of the harmful things that this Trump presidency has done. Because I think that people are truly hungry for a clear vision from Democrats, which I think some people have not really, always seen. So I think that we need to have a really clear vision for safe communities, for treating every person with dignity, for making sure everyone has health care and basic human needs met, and a path to really achieve the American dream. So there's a lot that has to happen, but I also think that there's been uh, we've got some great candidates. I'm also really excited about our state Senate and state House candidates. I'm hopeful that the state House will return to Democratic control and that we can hang on to the majority in the Senate. Of course, I won't be there for the next term, but I'm really hopeful
Are you
that
timed out?
I will be termed out at the end of next year. But I'm
Okay.
really excited about a lot of the good people that are running and know that they will be able to carry on a lot of the good work.
Well, let me ask you this pointed question. Do you think that the worst thing that could happen to Michigan next year is to elect a Republican as governor?
Well, so I mean, again, I'm going to just work really hard to elect a Democratic governor. So I'm just going to put all my energy into that and supporting our candidates. And again, we've got some really great people running. I'm very excited about putting in the work there.
But you don't
Um,
subscribe to the question that the worst thing that could happen is to the statement that the worst thing that could happen is to have a Republican governor next year here in Michigan.
I mean, it could be really devastating, but I also recognize, like, I served in the minority for 8 years. It was tough. It was tough. I don't want us to return to that. I hope that we can just continue moving forward. And we think about the budget that we just passed, right? There's so many incredible things that are there because we have a Democratic governor and a Democratic state legislature. So I'm hopeful that we can, regain the trifecta with both the Democratic House, Democratic Senate, and Democratic governor, because many of these issues are going to be only tackled and prioritized by
Mm.
Democrats. So I'm going to do everything I can to help.
Right, I got two more questions for you, and of course, and that is, what is the temperature among your colleagues, Democratic colleagues in Lansing right now, as you watch what is happening in Washington D.C., and of course the ripple effect across the country. What's the temperature like? What are you guys talking about?
Well, we're talking about a lot, right? And I think that a lot of us are watching some of the things that are happening in DC, especially with Medicaid, especially with SNAP benefits,
Hmm.
attacks on higher ed, the unjust deportations with no due process, and just the list goes on, right? I mean, the sharing of personal data. I think that there is a lot that we're concerned about, just like every Michigander maybe not every, but that many Michiganders are concerned about. And so for a lot of us, we are trying to find ways to be able to thoughtfully talk about those issues with people who are concerned. And then also, of course, introduce our own bills that help to provide a counterpoint to what's going on in DC. So I'll give you an example. In a couple of months ago, I can't remember which month, but we introduced some bills around immigrants' rights. Myself and Senator Mary Cavanaugh and Senator Jeremy Moss. The bills would ban law enforcement officers from wearing face covering masks. They would codify sensitive locations policy, which protects schools, hospitals, churches, etc., courthouses from immigration enforcement, and also protecting personal data from being used for immigration enforcement. And so we are providing a counterpoint on this issue. But there's also lots of other examples as well. But then on top of all of that, we also are trying to just really stay focused on what are the things that we can do that are bipartisan that should have, support because they're just common sense things that we can try to get done in the current makeup that we have in this legislature.
And finally, there's been a lot of analysis about the fact that Democrats are, you know, national Democrats are pretty much trying to regain their footing, and it's hard for them to pinpoint an attack, launching pad, if you will, to really counter what the administration is doing in Washington and so forth. The question remains open the question remains open about whether the same can be said for Democrats in Lansing here as you march into 2026. Do you feel that you're in a place where you're trying to regain your footing? Have enough lessons been learned over the last couple of months? And of course, with the trifecta in the rear view mirror.
Yeah, I mean, I think that we've all been learning a lot of lessons, and I mean, let's just be honest, right? As the Michigan legislature, we've been through a lot. We have been through a lot together, and especially thinking about my Senate Democratic colleagues, who saw 247 of our bills die in the House in, late December that we worked really hard on, that would have made a giant difference for Michiganders. There's definitely lessons to be learned there, and I think the fact that we have a lot to be proud of that we accomplished in our last trifecta with gun violence prevention and reproductive freedom, and the Working Families Tax Credit or EITC, the retirement tax repeal, all of these things were huge, right? And so but we need to be able to continue to talk about those wins and also talk about what more we're going to do. And sort of like I mentioned earlier, really try to be unafraid about tackling hard things. Because I think that one of the things that I hope that we have all learned now is that when we regain the trifecta, we need to seize the opportunity to do everything we possibly can, and really take some lessons from Minnesota because we know that they were in a similar situation, right, where they had a trifecta, they lost it, and then when they regained their trifecta, they had a list that was ready to go. So we need to be ready with that list, and to make sure that we are taking on all, as many tough issues that we can that Michiganders are ready and waiting for us for.
All right. Well, thank you, Senator, for being here.
Thank you.